They gave her 72 hours to become a wife, as if a marriage could be stitched together like an emergency shroud. The bride stood at the top of the staircase in her family's grand hall, fingers tight on the railing, pretending she was steady while her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. Below, guests dressed in silk and diamonds filled the room, smiling the way people smile at tragedies that aren't theirs. Her stepfamily had invited everyone important, not to celebrate love, but to witness an ending. She could feel it in every whisper, every careful glance that slid away from her pale face. They called her weak, unlucky, doomed, and she let them, because arguing never saved her. Only surviving did Dot, her stepmother, announced the good news, with a voice sweet enough to hide poison. The vampire king of Nightfall had agreed to take a human bride, she said, a symbol of peace between worlds. The bride's name was spoken like an offering placed on a cold altar. The crowd gasped, because everyone knew the stories. Human brides who entered Nightfall Castle did not return. When she tried to speak, her stepsister's hand tightened around her arm, like a warning disguised as affection. "Smile," her stepsister murmured. "At least you'll be remembered." That was when the bride understood the truth clearly, like a blade finally turning toward the light. They didn't want her healed. They wanted her gone. She had been sick for years, always tired, always breathless, always told to swallow the next pill and be grateful. But the sickness never behaved like illness should. Some days her heart raced wildly after one dose, and other days it slowed until she feared it would stop. A few nights ago, an old Dr. One her stepmother hadn't chosen had trembled as he confessed what he'd found, a toxin hidden inside her medicine, given in small doses for years, then increased until she looked terminal. It wasn't treatment. It was a slow murder designed to look natural. And now, with her father gone and legal papers waiting like hungry wolves, her stepmother's plan was simple: marry her off fast, send her somewhere terrifying, and inherit everything when she died. So the bride stepped into the black carriage at dawn with 3 trunks and one secret plan. She had stopped taking the pills. She carried safer remedies. The old doctor gave her charcoal to pull the toxin from her blood, supplements to steady her heart's small tools against a powerful woman. As the manor shrank behind her, she didn't cry. She watched her stepmother's satisfied smile and promised herself one thing: if she was going to die, she would not die quietly. The road north grew darker with each mile, the forests thickening, villages fading into silence when the carriage passed. But strangely, as days went by and the poison left her system, her mind cleared. For the first time in years, she could feel the difference between weakness and healing. Nightfall Castle rose like a dream made of stone and moonlight, beautiful in a way that didn't match the horror stories. Warm lanterns glowed in windows, and the air carried the scent of wood fire and bread. Servants stood in neat lines, not cruel, not fearful, just ready. And at the top of the steps waited the vampire king. He was tall, pale, and impossibly still, like a storm held back by discipline. The bride expected hunger in his eyes. Instead, she saw something she didn't understand: control, caution, and a loneliness so old it felt carved into his bones. He stopped a respectful distance away and spoke her name gently, as if it mattered. Then he did something that cracked her fear in half. He asked permission before offering his arm. Inside, the castle was quiet grandeur stars painted on high ceilings, tapestries of forgotten kingdoms, a library that smelled of ancient ink. The king told her he knew she had not chosen this, and he promised she would not be harmed within his walls. He did not demand gratitude. He did not threaten. He simply watched her carefully, like he was listening to something under her words. When she swayed slightly from exhaustion, he did not touch her until she nodded, and even then his hand was steady, not possessive. That night, as the final preparations for the wedding ended, He looked at her with those storm-gray eyes and spoke in a low voice that carried no cruelty at all. "Your heartbeat," he said softly. "It's fighting something it shouldn't be fighting." The bride froze, realizing her hidden secret wasn't hidden from him. And before she could deny it, the vampire king added one sentence that changed everything. "Tell me who has been poisoning you, before they come here to finish the job." Asterisk. The wedding was quiet, nothing like the spectacle her stepmother would have staged. There were no crowds waiting for her to stumble, no applause heavy with false sympathy. Inside Nightfall's chapel, candlelight reflected off pale stone walls and stained glass painted not with saints, but with season's winter melting into spring, night folding gently into dawn. The bride wore a simple ivory gown chosen by her own hand, not a costume designed by someone else's ambition. The vampire king stood across from her in black, dignified and composed. Yet there was a tension in his stillness that spoke of restraint rather than dominance. When the vows were spoken, his voice did not command. It promised. He did not vow possession or obedience. He vowed safety, choice, and protection within his walls. And when the officiant stepped back and tradition expected a kiss, he turned to her and said quietly, "Only if you wish." No one had ever given her a choice in something that mattered. She surprised herself by stepping forward first. That night, fear returned the moment she was shown to her chambers. Not because of him, but because years of control do not disappear in a single promise. The suite was elegant but warm, filled with soft firelight and shelves of books rather than cold luxury. A carved wooden door connected her room to his. She stared at it too long. He noticed. "It locks from your side," he said gently. "I will never open it without your permission." The words were simple, yet they shook something loose inside her. She nodded, unsure how to respond to respect. After he left, she took her charcoal mixture and supplements, her hands steadier than they had been in months. She expected the pounding in her chest to start as it always did at night, but instead there was only quiet. The silence felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous in its peace that days passed with a strange rhythm. She explored the castle slowly, still rebuilding her strength. The servants did not treat her like prey or decoration. They bowed with courtesy and met her eyes without mockery. An elderly royal advisor welcomed her with surprising warmth and said plainly, "You are safe here." The bride wanted to believe it, yet years of deception had trained her to search for traps in kindness. The king remained distant but attentive. He did not hover. He did not interrogate. But whenever she entered a room, his gaze briefly softened, as if checking that she was still standing. She caught him once in the courtyard at dawn, carrying sacks of supplies toward the forest beyond the castle. Curious, she followed quietly and saw him leave bread and medicine near a small village before retreating into shadow. He did not seek gratitude. He avoided it. That image unsettled her more than any threat could have. On the fourth night, her body betrayed her. She woke breathless, heart racing wildly, old terror flooding back like a storm. For a moment, she thought the poison had finally claimed her. She reached for the bell cord with trembling fingers. Footsteps came quickly, and her door opened to reveal the king, already awake as if he had sensed the shift in her pulse. He stopped at the edge of her bed and asked, "May I?" "Even in crisis," he asked. She nodded desperately. He knelt so that his eyes were level with hers and told her to breathe with him. Slow, measured, steady. His voice did not rise. It anchored her. A healer arrived and explained calmly that the toxin would take weeks to fully clear from her system, that episodes might continue but would weaken with time. When the panic subsided, she whispered an apology for being broken. His expression changed then, something fierce and protective surfacing beneath restraint. "You are not broken," he said quietly. You are healing. She expected him to leave once she stabilized, but instead he sat in a chair beside her bed, hands folded carefully as if afraid of overstepping. I will stay until you sleep, he said. In the dim light, she studied him more closely than she had dared before. This was not a monster eager for weakness. This was a ruler who carried centuries of regret like invisible armor. Why did you agree to marry me? She asked softly. He hesitated before answering. Because I am tired of being feared, he admitted. And when I learned you were being sent away sick and unwanted, I recognized something familiar. She understood then that loneliness can exist in both cages and castles. As sleep pulled at her. She reached out and took his hand without asking permission. His skin was cool, but his grip was steady and careful. You heard my heartbeat, she murmured. Can you hear anything else? He was silent for a long moment before replying in a low voice that carried quiet certainty. Yes, he said. I hear resilience, and I hear that whatever was done to you was deliberate. The bride's eyes opened fully at that. The king did not look angry. He looked resolved. And for the first time, she realized her secret was no longer hers alone. 3 weeks after the wedding, when her strength had begun to return and the trembling in her hands had nearly disappeared, a formal carriage bearing the crest of the Council of Seven arrived at Nightfall's gates. The guards allowed it entry only after strict inspection, yet the tension in the air shifted instantly. The bride had heard of the council, all her life 7 powerful families who controlled trade routes, laws, and political alliances across the provinces. Her stepmother had long boasted of her influence among them. When the bride was summoned to the throne hall, she understood without being told that this visit had nothing to do with courtesy. The vampire king sat upright upon his dark stone throne, not relaxed as he was in private, but composed in the quiet authority of someone who had survived centuries of negotiation and war. She took her place beside him, not behind, and noticed a flicker of approval in his eyes. The council representative was Lord Armand Vane, a man with silver-threaded hair and a smile that felt carefully rehearsed. He bowed shallowly, more acknowledgement than respect. Your Majesty, he began smoothly, we come in the spirit of cooperation. The bride recognized the tone. It was the same one her stepmother used before delivering harm disguised as opportunity. Lord Vane spoke of treaties and shared interests, of peace that depended on mutual goodwill. Then he shifted the subject. We have received troubling reports, he continued, glancing toward the bride. It seems your wife arrived at Nightfall gravely ill. Some in the council fear that human medicine has failed her. It would be unfortunate if such weakness led to tragedy. The insult was subtle but deliberate. The king's jaw tightened slightly, yet he did not interrupt. What are you asking? The bride said calmly before the silence thickened. Lord Vane's smile sharpened. Stories claim that vampire blood carries remarkable restorative properties. A small vial, offered in good faith, could be studied. Perhaps it might cure not only your bride, but others in the provinces who suffer. The room grew colder, though no wind moved. The bride understood immediately. This was not charity. It was leverage. If the king surrendered his blood, the council would gain power over Nightfall knowledge that could be weaponized or sold. If he refused, they could claim he had allowed a human bride to wither under his roof. No, the king replied simply. The word carried no raised voice, yet it struck like iron. Lord Vane tilted his head. You would refuse a gesture that could save lives? The bride stepped forward slightly. My condition is improving, she said firmly, because I stopped taking the poison that made me ill. The word poison hung in the chamber like smoke. The council representative's expression flickered for the first time. That is a serious accusation, he replied carefully. "It is a serious truth," she answered. She described the manipulated dosages, the hidden toxage, the medical evidence she carried. She did not tremble. The king remained silent, allowing her voice to fill the hall. When she finished, Lord Vane's polished composure had cracked just enough to reveal calculation beneath it. "Even if your claims are valid," he said slowly, "they do not change the political reality. The Council expects transparency. Refusal may force us to reconsider the stability of our treaty." It was not a direct threat, yet everyone present heard the meaning. Armies could march if alliances failed. Trade routes could close. Isolation could follow. The king rose from his throne then, descending the steps until he stood directly before the representative. "My blood is not a commodity," he said quietly, "and my wife is not bait." His tone was controlled, but beneath it lay centuries of disciplined power. "If the council doubts our alliance, let them send physicians to verify her recovery. Let them investigate the poisoning. But they will not extort Nightfall under the guise of compassion." The bride felt something shift within her. Weeks ago she would have hidden behind fear, grateful someone else was speaking for her. Now she understood that silence would only feed manipulation. "If the council values justice," she added steadily, "they will pursue the truth of who attempted to murder me instead of exploiting my survival." Lord Vane studied her carefully, perhaps reassessing the fragile girl he had expected. Finally, he bowed again, this time slightly deeper. "We will relay your statements," he said. "The council will deliberate." He turned and left the hall with measured steps. When the doors closed, the bride exhaled slowly. "They won't let this go," she murmured. The king looked at her not with alarm, but with quiet admiration. "Neither will we," he replied. "But now they know you are not what they assumed." She met his gaze, realizing something equally important. "And they know you will not be manipulated through me." He inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging an equal rather than a dependent. Outside, the carriage wheels rolled away from Nightfall. Carrying more than a report, they carried the first sign that the bride was no longer a sacrifice, but a force the council had not anticipated. The sickness began in the northern villages beyond Nightfall's protection. Quiet at first, whispered through traders and travelers who spoke of young vampires collapsing without warning. Their skin turned pale as ash, their pulses slowed unnaturally, and within days they were gone. It was not hunger, not injury, not any illness the healers recognized. By the time the reports reached the castle formally, 12 children had died. The throne hall felt heavier when the next council envoy arrived. This time, a woman named Lady Seraphine Vale, sharp-eyed and impeccably composed. She did not waste time on pleasantries. "The council believes this plague threatens regional stability," she said coolly. "If Nightfall is to remain under treaty protection, your kingdom must demonstrate value." The bride understood the message beneath the polished words. Solve the plague or face political isolation. The king's expression did not change, but she felt the tension ripple beneath his restraint. "We are already investigating," he replied. Lady Seraphine's gaze shifted to the bride. "Perhaps Her Majesty can assist. After all, she claims to have survived a sophisticated poisoning. It would be unfortunate if her talents ended there." The insult was subtle but deliberate, reducing her survival to coincidence rather than resilience. The bride stepped forward without waiting to be prompted. "Give us 15 days, she said clearly. "If we find nothing, you may reassess your treaty." The king turned his head slightly toward her, surprise flickering before it settled into quiet approval. Lady Seraphine considered, then nodded once. 15 days. Fail, and the council will reconsider whether Nightfall remains. Necessary? When she left, the silence she created lingered like a shadow. The bride did not retreat to her chambers. Instead, She went straight to the library, that vast sanctuary of knowledge the king had built over centuries. She had noticed something weeks ago in his medical text's careful annotations about blood disorders, toxin interactions, and rare herbal compounds. Now she searched with urgency. The symptoms described in the plague reports reminded her disturbingly of her own poisoned condition: irregular pulse, weakness, faintness. Only this illness progressed far faster. As she scanned pages, she found a section discussing a rare plant, extract that could slow a vampire's heart to dangerous levels when improperly refined. Her breath caught. Digitalis had nearly killed her. Could a variation of it affect vampires differently? She carried the book to the king's private study, where he was already reviewing reports. "I think this is not a natural plague," she said, placing the text before him. "Look at the pattern. It spreads through shared food supplies. It weakens the heart specifically. This isn't random, it's engineered." He read quickly, storm-gray eyes narrowing. "If someone refined a toxin to target vampire physiology," he murmured, "it would resemble illness until too late." The realization settled heavily between them. This was not disease. It was sabotage. "The council suspects weakness," she said slowly. "But what if someone within their network is creating this crisis?" The king's jaw tightened. "Then they are risking war." They worked side by side for hours, testing small samples brought from affected villages. The bride insisted on assisting despite his hesitation. She recognized the scent of manipulated herbs immediately. Years of being poisoned had trained her senses painfully well. "This compound is altered," she said firmly. "It's close to medicinal preparation, but the ratio is wrong. It becomes lethal." The king watched her with something deeper than gratitude. He was seeing not fragility, but intellect sharpened by survival. "You're certain?" he asked. She met his gaze steadily. "Yes, and I can attempt a countermeasure." The risk was immense. If she miscalculated, more children could die. Yet doing nothing guaranteed continued loss. Over the next days, she brewed small doses of a stabilizing remedy based on potassium balance and neutralizing agents, adjusting formulas carefully under the guidance of Nightfall's healers. The first child treated showed improvement within hours. By the second day, 3 more stabilized. Word spread quickly through the villages. Hope replaced fear in cautious increments. But the bride knew something darker still lurked beneath success. The plague did not begin accidentally. Someone had supplied tainted provisions deliberately. She examined a recovered container and found a symbol pressed faintly into the wax seal. A mark she recognized from her stepmother's trading partners. Her pulse quickened, not from weakness this time, but realization. "This reaches further than Nightfall," she whispered. "This reaches into the council itself." That evening, as they stood overlooking the castle walls, the king spoke quietly. "You have given them proof of value." She shook her head. This was never about proving worth. It was about protecting children. He studied her profile in the fading light. "That is precisely why they will fear you." She turned toward him, understanding the weight of what she had uncovered. The plague was not just a crisis. It was leverage designed to test Nightfall's vulnerability. And now, by curing it, she had disrupted someone's carefully laid plan. Far below, a courier rode hard toward the southern provinces, likely carrying news of the failed scheme. The bride felt the shift in the air, like the calm before a confrontation. Whoever engineered the plague would not remain silent after losing their advantage. Within 10 days, the stabilizing remedy had halted the deaths in the northern villages, and word spread faster than fear ever had. Vampire families who once whispered about the fragile human bride now spoke her name with cautious gratitude. The council could no longer claim Nightfall lacked value. The proof was living and breathing in recovering children. Yet victory did not bring peace. The bride knew the plague had not appeared by accident, and the faint trade seals she recognized from her stepmother's network suggested a supply chain, manipulation far too deliberate to be coincidence. When the king's informants confirmed that certain grain shipments had passed through merchants tied loosely to council allies, suspicion hardened into quiet certainty. Someone had engineered this crisis to corner Nightfall politically, expecting failure. What they had not expected was her. The council convened an emergency session and summoned both the king and his bride to present their findings. The journey to the council city felt heavier than her wedding carriage had months ago, but this time she was not a sacrifice, she was evidence. The grand chamber of the Council of Seven gleamed with marble and gold, power displayed openly rather than hidden in shadow. Her stepmother stood among them, composed and elegant, her expression carefully neutral when their eyes met. Lady Seraphine addressed the room first, acknowledging that Nightfall's intervention had prevented further deaths. However, she added coolly, we require transparency regarding the origin of this cure. The implication was clear. Knowledge equaled leverage. The bride stepped forward before the king could answer. The toxin used against the children was derived from improperly refined heart-regulating compounds, she said steadily. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The same category of compounds that nearly killed me. Her stepmother's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Years of surviving deliberate poisoning forced me to study what was harming my body, she continued. That knowledge allowed me to recognize the pattern in this engineered plague. Silence followed, heavy and electric. She had not intended to reveal the full extent of her suffering publicly, but concealment would only empower those who weaponized secrets. You claim expertise from victimhood? Her stepmother asked smoothly, attempting to diminish the statement. The bride met her gaze without flinching. I claim resilience and evidence. The king spoke then, his voice calm yet edged with restrained force. Our investigation traced contaminated supplies to merchants with council affiliations. We do not accuse lightly, but we demand accountability. The chamber erupted into overlapping arguments until Lady Seraphine struck the floor with her staff for silence. If such sabotage originated within our own trade networks, she said sharply, it threatens the council's integrity. Her eyes shifted briefly toward the bride's stepmother. Political alliances trembled subtly beneath polished composure. Then came the unexpected turn. A senior counselor rose slowly and addressed the bride directly. There is rumor, he said carefully, that your maternal lineage once belonged to healers who served both human and vampire courts generations ago. If so, your survival may not be coincidence. The bride felt the weight of that statement like a spotlight. She had grown up believing her mother's quiet knowledge of herbs was simple rural skill, but fragments of memory surfaced stories whispered at bedtime about shared bloodlines and ancient accords. My mother taught me to listen before I spoke, she replied evenly. If there is healer heritage in my blood, it manifests as study and compassion, not magic. The king's gaze softened subtly. He understood what it cost her to stand exposed like this. Her stepmother attempted one final maneuver. If her blood carries such potential, she said lightly, perhaps it should be examined for the good of all. The suggestion hung dangerously in the air, echoing the earlier demand for the king's blood. The bride answered before fear could root her in place. My blood is not a commodity, she said firmly. Nor is his. The cure came from knowledge and careful research, not supernatural exploitation. The king's presence beside her shifted slightly closer. Silent reinforcement rather than overshadowing protection. After hours of tense deliberation, the council formally acknowledged Nightfall's contribution and opened an internal inquiry into the compromised trade routes. It was not full justice, but it was fracture. Her stepmother's influence had cracked publicly. As they departed the chamber, the bride felt both relief and exhaustion. She had revealed pieces of herself she once guarded fiercely. Outside, beneath an overcast sky, the king turned to her quietly. "You risked everything to speak," he said. She exhaled slowly. "If I hid the truth, they would own it." He studied her for a long moment. "There is more you have not told me," he observed gently, not accusing but perceptive. She hesitated, knowing he deserved honesty. "There is," she admitted softly. "My mother believed our lineage once bound vampire and human healers together through shared study and trust. If that history resurfaces, it could unite or divide us all." He did not recoil or question her loyalty. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "Then we face it together," he said. In that simple response, she understood the difference between power that controls and power that chooses partnership. But as their carriage began the journey back to Nightfall, she sensed the calm would not last. Exposure breeds retaliation, and her stepmother had never accepted defeat quietly. The return to Nightfall was quieter than the journey to the council chamber, but the silence carried weight rather than fear. The plague had been contained, the trade routes investigated, and the council's public acknowledgement of Nightfall's contribution shifted the political balance. Yet the bride felt unfinished, as though one final truth still stood between who she had been and who she was becoming. That evening, she asked the king to meet her in the castle's highest tower, where lantern light brushed against ancient stone and the wind carried the scent of autumn. He arrived without guards, without ceremony, simply himself. "You said there was more," he reminded her gently. His voice carried no suspicion, only patience. She took a steady breath. "My mother once told me our family descended from a line of human healers who worked alongside vampires during the early peace accords. They studied physiology together, shared research, built trust. When tensions rose centuries ago, that partnership fractured. Humans accused vampires of manipulation. Vampires accused humans of betrayal. The records were burned, alliances dissolved." She looked at him directly. "If the council learns that such a lineage still exists through me, they may attempt to control it, weaponize it, or fear it." The king listened without interruption. "And you feared I would see you as a threat," he said quietly. She nodded once. "I feared you would see me as leverage." For a moment he was silent, the wind moving through his dark hair. Then he stepped closer, not to dominate, but to be heard clearly. "I spent centuries being feared for what I was," he said. "I will not repeat that mistake by fearing you for what you are. Knowledge is not a weapon unless placed in cruel hands." His gaze softened. "You chose to use yours to save children. That defines you more than any bloodline." Relief moved through her like warmth. She had expected caution, perhaps distance. Instead, she found partnership. Their quiet moment did not last long. A messenger arrived at dawn with urgent news. Her stepmother had been formally accused in the council's internal inquiry. Evidence connected her trade affiliates to the contaminated shipments. Rather than submit to investigation, she had attempted to flee. The council demanded extradition if she sought refuge near Nightfall's borders. The bride felt the old ache stir within her, the memory of years spent under calculated cruelty. "She will not surrender easily," she said. The king's expression hardened slightly. "No, but this time she cannot hide behind influence." He paused before adding, "What do you wish to happen?" The question mattered more than the outcome. "I want justice," she replied, "not vengeance. Let the council judge her by their own laws. If we retaliate outside that structure, we become what they accuse us of being." He inclined his head in agreement. It was the same restraint he had shown in refusing to give his blood under pressure. Together, they sent formal notice offering cooperation with the investigation and safe passage for council officers to operate within Nightfall's territory if necessary. It was a calculated act of transparency, one that demonstrated confidence rather than aggression. Weeks later, the council declared her stepmother guilty of orchestrating both the long-term poisoning and the engineered plague supply route. Assets were seized, alliances dissolved. For the first time, power did not protect cruelty. When the official decree was read aloud in Nightfall's hall, the bride felt no triumph, only closure. The past no longer had control over her future. The people of Nightfall gathered in the courtyard that evening, not to celebrate punishment, but to acknowledge unity. The vampire families whose children had recovered approached her with gratitude, not born of fear, but respect. As twilight deepened, the king addressed his people. "Strength is not domination," he said steadily. "It is the courage to choose restraint, to protect rather than conquer." When he extended his hand toward her, inviting her to stand beside him before the gathered crowd, she stepped forward willingly. She was no longer the frightened girl sent away to disappear. She was a woman who had confronted poison, politics, and fear, and chosen integrity each time. The people bowed not because she was human or healer, but because she had proven herself through action. Later that night, in the quiet of their shared tower room, she looked at the crown